After my wife passed away, my son and daughter-in-law said, "Dad, you're too old to run the company anymore. Give it back to us quickly." But what they didn't know was that 3 weeks before she died, my wife had given me an envelope and said, "If they want the company, give them everything." I looked at her in bewilderment. She smiled, "Let them learn a lesson." And now I know she was right. It's time for the greedy to be taught a lesson. I'm truly grateful that you're here. Quick question. Where are you watching from? Drop your location below. Please note that this is a fictional story crafted to explore deep lessons about family and legacy. If you don't like it, feel free to leave. I held Dorothy's hand as the monitor flatlined at 6:47 a.m. on March 12, 2024. The sound, that high-pitched, endless beep, cut through the dim hospital room like a blade. I'd been awake all night in the vinyl chair beside her bed, watching the jagged green line of her heartbeat climb and dip across the screen. For 38 years, I'd known the rhythm of Dorothy Sullivan's heart. Now it was just a flat line and a tone that wouldn't stop. Time of death, 6:47 a.m. The doctor spoke the words with practiced gentleness, then reached past me and silenced the monitor. The sudden quiet was worse than the beeping. Dorothy's hand was still warm in mine. Her skin held heat, even though everything else about her, the fight, the breath, the steel, had gone cold. My son Matthew stood at the foot of the bed, shoulders shaking. He was 37 years old, built like a linebacker, and he wept like a child. I wanted to stand and hold him, but my legs wouldn't move. "Dad." His voice broke. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I nodded. That was all I could manage. The nurse touched my shoulder. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Sullivan." She and the doctor slipped out, closing the door with a soft click. Matthew came around and knelt beside me. "She's gone," he whispered, like saying it might make it untrue. I smoothed a strand of gray hair from Dorothy's forehead. She'd hated that hair, spent years dyeing it brown until the treatments made it fall out. When it grew back silver, she'd finally let it be. "Guess I'm finally distinguished," she'd joked. "She is," I said. My voice sounded far away. "Your mother's gone." We sat there in the fluorescent hum of St. Thomas Midtown Hospital's 6th floor, and I tried to figure out how the world could keep spinning when Dorothy Sullivan had just stopped. Matthew finally straightened, wiping his face. "I'll go call Claire, and I'll try Preston again." Preston. I'd been waiting for him to say the name. My older son, 41 years old. The boy I'd taught to swing a hammer. The young man I'd trusted to run crews, the adult I'd fired 8 years ago for stealing $52,000 from the company his mother and I built. "Well, Preston didn't come," I said. Matthew looked at his boots. "I called him 4 times last night, texted him. Brittany finally answered around 3 a.m. and said he'd call back. He never did." The anger should have come then, hot and righteous. But all I felt was a hollow ache. Dorothy had warned me 3 weeks ago, when she could still speak without gasping. She'd gripped my wrist and looked me straight in the eye. "Preston won't come," she'd said. "He's got other plans. You'll see." I hadn't wanted to believe her. Matthew, go make your calls," I said. "I need a minute." He left. The door whispered shut. I sat alone with what was now just a body and let myself feel the weight of what Dorothy had told me. She'd been right about so many things over the years. About buying that first piece of land in 1986. About hiring Raymond Foster when everyone said he was too old school. About giving Matthew a shot when Preston said his brother wasn't ready. And now she was right about this. The parking lot was half empty when I walked out into the gray dawn. March in Nashville is unpredictable sometimes. Spring, sometimes winter. That morning, the air was cold enough to sting. Matthew leaned against his truck phone in his pocket. Claire's on her way. She'll help with whatever needs doing. I unlocked my truck and stood there, key in hand. Dad. Matthew's voice was careful. Where's Preston? I looked at my son, my good son, the one who'd shown up every day for 6 months, who'd sat with his mother and read to her when she couldn't sleep, who'd held her hand and told her stories about the job sites. Preston, I said slowly, had other things to attend to. Matthew's jaw tightened. What other things? His mother just died. I don't know, son, but your mother told me he wouldn't be here, and she was right. I climbed into the truck before he could ask anything else. The drive home took 12 minutes. I counted every red light, every turn. Dorothy and I had driven these streets together for nearly 4 decades. Now I was alone. The house felt wrong the moment I opened the door. Too quiet, too still. I walked through the kitchen, where Dorothy's coffee mug still sat by the sink, past the photos on the wall, our wedding in 1986. The boys as kids, the company sign the day we hung it. I stopped in front of her chair. The blue recliner she'd claimed 20 years ago worn smooth in the armrests from where she'd sit every evening reviewing invoices. It was empty. It would always be empty now. I sat on the couch and pulled out my phone. No missed calls. No texts. At 9:30 a.m., 3 hours after Dorothy died, my phone finally rang. Preston's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. Dad. His voice was steady, businesslike. Matthew texted me. I'm sorry about Mom. Sorry. One word delivered like he was apologizing for missing a meeting. Where were you? I asked. A pause. I had some things to take care of. I would have been there if I could. If I could. Like his mother dying was a scheduling conflict. Your brother was there, I said. Your mother asked for you. Another pause, longer. Dad, I know this is hard. We'll need to talk about arrangements. And the business stuff, paperwork, assets, the will. We should meet with a lawyer. Paperwork. Assets. Will. Dorothy had been gone 3 hours, and my son was already dividing up her estate. Preston, I said quietly, your mother just died. I know. That's why we need to. Goodbye, Preston. I hung up before he could finish. I sat in the silence of my house, our house, Dorothy's and mine, and stared at her empty chair. She'd told me this moment would come. She'd planned for it, prepared for it, tried to warn me. You'll see, she'd said. When I'm gone, Preston will show you who he really is. And Warren, when that happens, I need you to trust me. I need you to do exactly what I've asked. I hadn't understood then. But sitting in that quiet house, staring at the chair where my wife would never sit again, I understood perfectly. Dorothy had known. She'd seen it coming. And wherever she was now, she was watching to see if I'd have the strength to see her plan through. I looked at her chair one more time. I'll trust you, I whispered to the empty room. I promise. I watched as 42 crew members filled East Nashville Baptist Church on Friday, March the 15th, 3 days after Dorothy died. They came in work boots and pressed shirts, men who'd spent 30 years swinging hammers and pouring concrete, standing shoulder to shoulder in the pews like they were reporting for a job. Some of them had been with us since the beginning. Others were young enough to be Dorothy's grandkids. But every single one of them showed up. The church smelled like old hymnals and furniture polish. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the worn carpet. Dorothy would have hated the fuss she'd told me once she wanted to be cremated and scattered at the site where we built our first house. But Matthew insisted on something proper, something the community could attend, and I didn't have the energy to argue. I sat in the front pew with Matthew on my left and an empty space on my right, where Preston should have been. The service was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. At 10:15, the sanctuary doors opened and Preston walked in with his wife, Brittany, 23 minutes late to his own mother's funeral. I didn't turn around, but I heard the whispers ripple through the crowd. Heard the shuffle of feet as Preston and Brittany made their way down the aisle. Matthew's hand tightened on my shoulder. Preston slid into the pew beside me, smelling like expensive cologne. "Sorry we're late," he muttered. "Traffic." I kept my eyes forward. There's no traffic in Nashville at 10 in the morning on a Friday. Not the kind that makes you 23 minutes late to say goodbye to the woman who gave you life. Brittany sat down next to Preston, and that's when I saw it. The dress. Cream-colored designer label probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and dangling from the tag still attached to the back seam, $2,400. She'd bought a new dress for the funeral and hadn't even bothered to remove the price tag. Matthew saw it too. I felt him stiffen beside me. But before either of us could say anything, Raymond Foster stepped up to the pulpit. Raymond was 54, built like a oak barrel, with hands that could crush concrete and a voice that could carry across a construction site in a windstorm. He'd been our foreman for 28 years. When Dorothy interviewed him back in 1996, he'd told her he didn't take orders from women. She'd handed him a hammer and said, "Then I guess you'll learn." He learned. Dorothy Sullivan. Raymond began, his voice steady but thick. Was the toughest person I ever met. And I've met a lot of tough people. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. She co-founded Sullivan and Sons Construction in 1986, with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and the kind of stubborn determination that could move mountains. Most folks didn't think a woman belonged on a job site back then. Dorothy proved them wrong every single day. Raymond talked about the early years, about Dorothy showing up to sites at dawn with coffee and blueprints outworking men twice her size, about the time she climbed a scaffold in a thunderstorm to secure a tarp because she didn't trust anyone else to do it right, about how she knew every crew member's name, their kids' names, and exactly what they needed to hear when a job went sideways. I listened to Raymond's words and felt the weight of 38 years pressing down on me. Dorothy had been my partner in every sense: business, life, love. Without her, I was just a man sitting in a church pew trying to figure out how to keep breathing. The service lasted 45 minutes. Then we drove to the cemetery. The graveside ceremony was smaller, just family and the core crew. The March wind cut cold across the hillside, rattling the tent they'd set up over the burial plot. Dorothy's casket sat suspended above the grave, covered in white roses, her favorite. The pastor said a few words about dust and ashes and resurrection. I stopped listening halfway through. I'd heard it all before. What I wanted was impossible. I wanted Dorothy back. I wanted one more morning of her humming in the kitchen. One more argument about which lumber supplier to use. One more night of her reading glasses perched on her nose while she reviewed invoices at the kitchen table. Instead, I got a hole in the ground and a line of people waiting to shake my hand and tell me she was in a better place. I was shaking hands on autopilot when I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Cooper. My grandson was 9 years old, all elbows and cowlick, wearing a suit that was already too short in the sleeves. He was Preston's boy, but he had Dorothy's eyes, sharp and gray, and way too observant for a kid his age. "Grandpa," he whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "Hey, buddy." I knelt down so we were eye level. "You doing okay?" He nodded, then pulled something from his jacket pocket. An envelope, cream-colored, sealed with red wax, with handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Dorothy's handwriting. My hands shook as I took it from him. The front read, "For Warren open when Preston shows his true colors." "Grandma gave me this last week." Cooper whispered, his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear. She said you'd know when. I stared at the envelope, at the neat, precise letters Dorothy had written with hands that were already dying. She'd known. Even then, lying in that hospital bed, she'd known exactly what was coming. "Thank you, Cooper," I managed. He nodded solemnly, then ran back to where Preston and Brittany stood by their car, already making their exit. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket and stood up. Matthew appeared at my elbow. "You okay, Dad?" Yeah, I wasn't, but what else could I say? We drove back to the church for the reception. The fellowship hall smelled like casseroles and coffee. Long tables groaned under the weight of dishes brought by neighbors and crew families, green bean casserole, fried chicken, potato salad, rolls, pies. Dorothy would have loved it. She always said you could measure a community by what showed up to the potluck. Preston and Brittany stayed exactly 18 minutes. I timed it. They made one pass through the food line, shook a few hands, and left. Preston mumbled something about needing to get back to work. Brittany checked her phone the entire time. The crew stayed for hours. They sat in folding chairs and told stories. About the time Dorothy caught a subcontractor cutting corners and made him tear out an entire foundation. About how she'd show up to job sites with homemade cookies on Fridays. About the way she could eyeball a measurement and be accurate within an eighth of an inch. I listened to them talk about my wife, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt something other than emptiness. I felt grateful. These men, these rough, calloused, loyal men had loved Dorothy, and she'd loved them back. By the time I got home, it was almost 7. The house was dark and silent. I walked through the door, set my keys on the counter, and pulled the envelope from my pocket. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at Dorothy's handwriting. The wax seal felt smooth and final under my thumb. Open when Preston shows his true colors. 23 minutes late. A $2,400 dress with the tag still on. 18 minutes at the reception. I thought about opening it. My fingers traced the edge of the envelope, feeling the slight weight of whatever was inside. But something stopped me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the sense that once I broke that seal, there'd be no going back. I set the envelope down on the table. "Not yet," I said to the empty room. "Not yet." I was sorting through Dorothy's books on March 22nd, when the doorbell rang at 2:15 p.m., 10 days since the funeral. 10 days of wandering through a house that felt too big and too quiet. I'd been working through the bookshelves in the living room, mysteries, gardening guides, construction manuals. Dorothy never threw books away. I was holding a copy of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, with her notes in the margins when the doorbell chimed. I wasn't expecting anyone. Matthew had called that morning to say he'd stop by after work. Through the frosted glass, I could see 4 silhouettes. My gut tightened. I opened the door. Preston stood on my porch in a suit that probably cost more than my truck. Behind him, Brittany in designer sunglasses, an older woman with Brittany's sharp cheekbones, and a man in his 50s carrying a briefcase. "Dad." Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Can we come in? We need to talk." I should have said no. But 41 years of being Preston's father made me step aside. The older woman made a beeline for Dorothy's blue recliner and sat down without asking. My hands clenched. That was Dorothy's chair. "Mr. Sullivan?" The man with the briefcase extended his hand. "I'm Graham Mitchell. I'm an attorney representing the Monroe family." I didn't shake it. "What's this about?" Preston cleared his throat. "Dad, we're worried about you. Mom's death has been hard, especially on you. We think you're not in a position to be making major decisions right now." "We think," the woman interrupted, "that you need support. I'm Vivian Monroe, Brittany's mother, Preston's mother-in-law." "Get out of that chair," I said quietly. Vivian blinked. Excuse me. That was my wife's chair. Get out. Silence. Finally, Vivian moved to the couch, her mouth pressed thin. Graham Mitchell pulled a folder from his briefcase. Mr. Sullivan, we're here to discuss a transition plan for Sullivan and Sons Construction. Given your recent bereavement and your age, we believe it's in everyone's best interest for Preston to assume full ownership and operational control. You're here to take my company. We're here to ensure the company's future, Preston said, looking uncomfortable, but not stopping. Dad, you're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. The business needs stable leadership. Stable leadership. I almost laughed. Like when you stole $52,000 from company accounts in 2016. Preston's face flushed. That was 8 years ago, Dad. You need to let it go. I made a mistake. I paid for it. You paid for it by getting fired. You didn't pay back a dime. Brittany spoke up. This isn't about the past. This is about protecting the business my husband helped build. Your husband worked for me 16 years and got fired for embezzlement. I cut her off. He didn't build anything except a gambling debt. Graham Mitchell held up a hand. Mr. Sullivan, let me be clear. Preston is prepared to file an emergency conservatorship petition, citing your inability to manage affairs due to grief and diminished capacity. We have documentation missed, supplier calls, payroll issues. I've been burying my wife, which is why you need support, Vivian said smoothly. No one's trying to hurt you, Warren. Sign the company over to Preston, step back. Consult in an advisory capacity. Let someone who isn't drowning in grief handle the day-to-day operations. I looked at Preston, at the son I'd taught to frame a wall to treat crew with respect. The son who'd promised to make me proud. Dorothy had been right all along. No, I said. Graham's expression hardened. If you refuse, we'll proceed with the conservatorship petition. A judge will appoint someone to manage your affairs. The outcome will be the same, you'll just lose control of the process. I said no. Get out. Dad! Preston started. The front door slammed open. Matthew stood in the doorway, still in work boots and dusty jeans, face flushed and jaw set. Dorothy used to get that same look before tearing someone apart. What the hell's going on here? Preston turned. Matthew, this doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. Matthew took 3 steps in making the room feel smaller. Mrs. Holloway texted me saying 4 people showed up in fancy suits. Thought something was wrong. Guess I was right. Graham tried to recover. Mr. Sullivan, we're simply having a business discussion with your father. A business discussion. Matthew looked at each of them, Vivian in her expensive pantsuit, Brittany on her phone, Preston in his $1,000 suit. You ambush a widower in his own home 10 days after his wife died with a lawyer and conservatorship threats and call that business? Matthew, I said quietly. It's okay. No, Dad, it's not. He turned to Preston. You didn't come when Mom was dying. You showed up late to her funeral. Now you're trying to take the company she built. Get out. This is between me and Dad, Preston said. So then why'd you bring a lawyer and your mother-in-law? Matthew shot back. Get out of my father's house. Now. Graham snapped his briefcase shut. We'll be filing the petition Monday morning, Mr. Sullivan. I'd advise you to retain counsel. They filed out, Preston pausing at the door to look back. For a second I thought I saw regret, but then Brittany called his name, and whatever I'd seen vanished. The door closed. Matthew turned to me, breathing hard. Dad, what? Give me a minute, son. I walked upstairs on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. In my bedroom, I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out the cream-colored envelope Cooper had given me at the graveside. Dorothy's handwriting stared back at me. For Warren open when Preston shows his true colors. I broke the seal. I opened the envelope at 9:47 p.m. that night. Inside were 3 pages in Dorothy's handwriting and a sealed folder labeled Sullivan Estate Contingency Plan. After Matthew left, I'd sat on the couch for hours, the envelope on the coffee table in front of me like a loaded gun. The house grew dark around me. I didn't turn on any lights. When the clock on the mantel chimed 9:30, I finally stood up, walked to the kitchen, and made a pot of coffee. I had no intention of drinking. Now I sat at the kitchen table where Dorothy used to review invoices every evening. The 3 pages spread out in front of me under the pendant light. Her handwriting, neat, precise, unmistakably hers, covered the paper in blue ink. The first page was dated July 20th, 2023, 8 months before she died. My dearest Warren, if you're reading this, then Preston has shown you who he really is. I'm sorry, my love. I know you hoped he'd be better. So did I for a long time. Last month, I found something I wasn't supposed to see. Brittany left her laptop open at Sunday dinner while she went to the bathroom. I was clearing plates when an email notification popped up. I shouldn't have looked. But the subject line said, Timeline, Sullivan Construction. And I couldn't stop myself. It was from Vivian Monroe, sent to Vernon Monroe and Brittany on June 14th, 2023. Warren, they've been planning this for over a year, planning to wait until I die and take the company while you're grieving. Vivian laid it all out like a military operation. Preston gets 40% controlling interest. Vivian takes 30%. Vernon gets 20%. Brittany gets 10%. They're planning to sell within 18 months for $8 to $10 million and split the profits. There's even a line item for Tanner's MBA program, $50,000 from first-year distributions. Preston doesn't know the full plan. The email made that clear. Vivian's been feeding him lines about his legacy and his rightful place. She's using him, Warren, and he's too proud or too stupid to see it. When I read that email, I wanted to confront them. I wanted to print it out and throw it in Preston's face at the next Sunday dinner. But then I thought about Cooper, about Matthew, about you, about everything we built together over 38 years. And I realized the best way to protect our family wasn't to stop them. It was to let them take exactly what they wanted. Warren, I've built them a trap. I've spent the last month working with Edward Harrison. You remember Edward, your old friend from the Rotary Club. He's been helping me put together a legal structure that will give Preston exactly what he's demanding while protecting everything that actually matters. Here's what I've done. 1. Change the life insurance beneficiaries. The policy is $1.35 million. I've split it 50-50 between Matthew and a trust for Cooper. It's outside the estate, so Preston can't touch it, no matter what happens with the company. 2. Restructured the company ownership through our LLC operating agreement. You still own 51% of the voting shares. Matthew owns 40% non-voting. Cooper's trust owns 9%. Preston doesn't own anything, and he never will. 3. Documented everything, every debt, every bond, every loan payment. Edward has copies of all of it. Warren, the company they're going to demand, the one they think is worth $8 to $10 million, is actually worth negative $2.9 million. Without you, it will collapse in 90 days. Maybe less. Let them take it. Let Preston sign his name to every debt, every obligation, every guarantee, and then step back and let mathematics do what I can't do anymore. Teach our son a lesson about what things actually cost. The second and third pages have all the numbers. Read them carefully, then call Edward. He knows what to do. I love you, Warren. I'm sorry I had to leave you alone for this part. But I trust you. I've always trusted you. Protect Matthew and Cooper. Let Preston learn. Yours always, Dorothy. My hands shook as I set the first page down. I had to read it twice before the words made sense. 3 times before I believed them. Dorothy had known. For 8 months she'd known. She'd been dying, and instead of resting, instead of spending her last months in peace, she'd been building a trap for our son. Number. Not a trap. A lesson. I picked up the second page. It was titled The Real Numbers in Dorothy's block print. Assets. Equipment appraised value $2,400,000. Accounts receivable $680,000. Cash on hand $180,000. Total $3,260,000. Annual revenue $6,800. 000. Note revenue depends entirely on Warren's relationships with general contractors, suppliers, and bonding companies. Preston has been fired from or alienated from most of these relationships. Without Warren, revenue will drop 60 to 80% within 90 days. Liabilities. Equipment loans $2,400,000. Monthly payment $43,500 for 36 months. Performance bonds $890,000. 5 active projects, all requiring Warren's personal guarantee. IRS payroll tax payment plan. $320,000. Monthly payment $8,900 for 24 months. 0 tolerance for late payments. Vendor accounts payable $465,000. Net 60 terms, but 3 major suppliers on cash only after Preston's 2016 theft. Pending malpractice lawsuit, $275. 000 claimed will likely settle for $50,000, but only with Warren's reputation intact. Commercial lease $8,500 per month for 48 months, equals $408,000 future obligation. Total liabilities $4,690. 000 net equity $2,890,000. At the bottom of the page, Dorothy had written in red ink, "Without Warren Sullivan, this company is worth less than nothing. Let Preston find out the hard way." The third page was shorter. A timeline. A step-by-step plan. Phase 1. Wait for Preston to make his move. He will. Vivian won't let him wait long. Phase 2. Offer to give him the company. Make it look like surrender. Edward will draft the paperwork. Phase 3. Let Preston take everything: assets, contracts, debts, leases, guarantees. Make sure he signs personal liability documents. Phase 4. Watch. Don't interfere. Let the bonds fail. Let the payments pile up. Let Preston discover what he actually inherited. Phase 5. Use the life insurance money to start over. Small company. Just you and Matthew. No debt. No Preston. Build something clean. At the bottom, one last note. Warren, this will hurt. Watching Preston fail will hurt worse than anything except losing you. But some lessons can't be taught, they have to be learned. And some sons can't be saved from themselves. I love him. I will always love him. But I love you and Matthew and Cooper more. And I won't let Preston's greed destroy what we built together. Trust me. Trust the plan. And when it's over, start over. I sat at that table until the coffee in my mug went cold. I read all 3 pages again. Then I walked through the house, touching things Dorothy had touched. Her reading glasses on the side table, the framed photo of us at our wedding. The company invoice from our very first job in 1986, framed on the wall, $3,200 for a garage addition in East Nashville. She'd built this company from nothing, and now she was asking me to let it burn so she could save our family from the ashes. At 11:04 p.m., I pulled out my phone and called Matthew. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "Ed, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said. "But I need you to come over first thing tomorrow morning. Your mother left us instructions." A pause. Instructions for what? I looked down at Dorothy's handwriting at the numbers that added up to negative $2.9 million at the trap she'd spent 8 months building. Instructions. I said, for how to save this family. If you're still with me after that reveal comment, the number 2, so I know you're invested in seeing how this plays out. Just a quick note. The story ahead includes creative elements that aren't based on literal events. If you'd rather not continue, you're welcome to close the video here. I came home from the job site on July 15, 2023, and found Dorothy sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open, tears streaming down her face. The letter in front of me was dated that day, 8 months before she died. Holding those pages at 11:04 p.m. on March 22, 2024, my mind pulled me back to that afternoon. I'd been working a residential project in Brentwood. Tennessee July heat, the kind that makes your shirt stick and every tool handle burn. I left Matthew to close up and drove home around 4:30 thinking about a cold beer and a shower. The house was too quiet when I walked in. Dorothy's car was in the driveway, but I didn't hear the TV or her humming in the kitchen. "Dorothy." No answer. I found her at the table, Brittany's laptop open, tears running down her cheeks. Not making a sound, just sitting there with her hand over her mouth, staring at the screen. "What's wrong?" My stomach dropped. What happened? She looked up, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not fear, something colder. "Warren," she said quietly. "Close the door and sit down." I sat. "Dorothy, you're scaring me." She turned the laptop around. The subject line read, "Timeline Sullivan Construction." From Vivian Monroe to Vernon Monroe, Brittany Sullivan, date June 14, 2023, 11:47 p.m. Vernon. Brittany, attached, is the preliminary breakdown. Dorothy's diagnosis is 6 to 12 months, according to what Preston told us. We wait until she passes, then move immediately while Warren is grieving and vulnerable. Percentages as discussed. Preston 40% controlling interest. Me 30%, Vernon 20%, Brittany 10%. Tanner gets $50,000 from first-year profits for his MBA program at Vanderbilt. Target sale price $8 to $10 million within 18 months of acquisition. Preston takes the title and runs operations. We take the money and exit clean. Key move fast. Warren is 64 and emotional. Graham Mitchell says conservatorship is the easiest legal route if he resists. We frame it as helping him through his grief. Critical. Preston doesn't know the full plan yet. Keep him thinking this is about his legacy and rightful place in the company. He's easier to control when he thinks it's his idea. Once we have the company, we can handle Preston however we need to. Timeline month 1 to 3. After Dorothy established conservatorship or pressure Warren to sign over, company month 4 to 6, restructure operations, cut costs. Maximize revenue month 7 to 12, market to buyers. I have 3 firms interested. Month 13 to 18, close sale, distribute proceeds. This is happening, Vernon. 50 years building that dry cleaning business taught me one thing. You don't leave money on the table when someone else is too weak to pick it up. V. I read it twice. Where did you get this? Brittany left her laptop after Sunday dinner. Dorothy said, voice steady now. Said she'd pick it up this week. I was going to text her, but I thought I'd look up that banana bread recipe she mentioned. The laptop was open. This email was on the screen. Your diagnosis. When did you CAQ? May stage 4, 6 to 12 months, maybe longer with treatment. She said it like a weather report. I told Preston because he asked why I looked tired. I didn't know he'd tell Vivian. I didn't know she was planning this. They're circling like vultures, I said, hands shaking. You're not even gone yet. I know. Dorothy reached across and took my hand. Hers was steady. Warren, we're going to do something smarter. We're going to use this. We're going to protect Matthew and Cooper. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and clicked a pen. Drew a line down the center. Left side, assets. Right side, liabilities. What's the company actually worth? She asked. I knew by heart. Equipment, $2.4 million. Receivables, $680. Cash, $180. $3.26 million total. She wrote it down. Liabilities. Equipment loans, $2.4 million. $43.5 a month. Performance bonds, $890,000. IRS payment plan, $320,000. Vendor payables, $465. Pending lawsuit, $275, claimed settle for $50. Office lease, $8,500 a month for 4 more years. Dorothy added it up. $4.69 million in liabilities. She wrote at the bottom, net equity minus $2.89 million. I stared at the negative number. We're underwater. We're cash flow positive because of your relationships, she corrected. Contractors trust you. Bonding companies trust you. Suppliers extend credit because Warren Sullivan pays his bills, but take you out, the whole thing collapses. In 90 days, maybe less. She looked up with that hard look. Warren, what if we let them take it? What if we give Preston exactly what he's demanding? Dorothy, that's cruel. She set down her pen. They're planning to exploit your grief over my death. Vivian's got buyers lined up. She's treating this like a business transaction. Preston's part of it. She gestured at the laptop. And Brittany's sitting in our house while her mother plans this. So we fight them. We teach them. Her voice was quiet but firm. We let Preston take the company. He signs his name to every debt, every obligation, and then we watch what happens when he realizes what he inherited. I thought about our son, the boy with the toy hammer, the teenager framing houses, the man who'd stolen $52,000. It'll destroy him. It'll teach him. Warren, some lessons can't be taught with words. They have to be learned through consequences. Her voice wavered. Some sons can't be saved from themselves. But we can save Matthew. We can save Cooper. And when I'm gone, you won't be left with nothing. She pulled out her phone. Edward Harrison. You remember him from Rotary. He does estate law now. I'm calling him tomorrow. Dorothy. This is happening, Warren. Those steady gray eyes. Vivian thinks she's going to take what we built and sell it. Preston thinks he's entitled to a company he didn't earn. They think I'm too sick to fight, and you're too old to stop them. She tapped the legal pad. Let's prove them wrong. I sat there looking at the woman I loved and realized she'd already decided. Dorothy Sullivan didn't make decisions lightly, and once she decided, God himself couldn't change her course. All right, I said. We'll do it your way. She smiled, small and sad and determined. Thank you for trusting me. That night, I held her hand across that kitchen table and we planned her revenge. I didn't know then that she'd be gone in 8 months. I didn't know I'd be sitting in this same spot on March 22nd, 2024, reading her letter and remembering this moment. But Dorothy knew. Even then, she knew exactly how this would end. I arrived at Edward Harrison's office at 9 a.m. on March 23rd, 11 days after Dorothy died, and 1 day after I opened her letter. Matthew met me in the parking lot, his truck covered in sawdust from the job site he'd left early. We didn't say much as we walked across the lot. We were about to hand over our family's company to the son who'd stolen from it all, because my dead wife had spent her last 8 months building a trap. Edward's office was on the second floor of an old brick building in downtown Nashville. The kind of place that smelled like leather and coffee and decades of quiet legal work. His receptionist waved us straight through. Edward stood when we entered. 66 years old, gray hair combed neat, wearing a suit that had gone out of style 20 years ago. He'd been at our wedding, had drawn up our wills when the boys were born, lost his own wife to cancer 3 years back. Warren, Matthew. He shook our hands. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. He gestured to the chairs. Sit. I've got everything ready. On his desk sat a folder. Thick, cream-colored. The tab read, Sullivan Estate, Contingency Plan. Matthew stared at it. That's Mom's. Every word, Edward said. He opened it carefully. Your mother came to see me on July 22nd, 2023, a week after she found Vivian's email. She worked with me for 7 months through February of this year. We met twice a week, sometimes more. She was very specific. He pulled out a stack of papers. 47 pages of documentation. Legal structures, asset transfers, liability assignments, and one very carefully worded settlement agreement. Settlement, I said. The word tasted bitter. On paper, yes. In reality, it's a trapdoor. Edward spread the documents across his desk. Let me walk you through what Dorothy built. He picked up the first document. August 2023. Dorothy changed the life insurance beneficiary. $1,350,000 split clean. 50% to Matthew, 50% to a trust for Cooper. Named beneficiaries bypass probate entirely. Preston can't touch it. Matthew leaned forward. Mom did that last summer, while doing treatments. Edward set that aside and picked up another. September 2023. LLC operating agreement restructured. Warren, you retain 51% voting control. Matthew gets 40% non-voting. Cooper's trust gets 9%. Preston's name doesn't appear in the ownership structure. So legally, Preston doesn't own any of the company, I said. Correct. Never has. He was an employee. Edward pulled out a document marked with yellow tabs. This is the settlement offer. You, Warren, voluntarily relinquish operational control to Preston. In exchange, Preston drops any conservatorship petition, waives all future claims, and accepts the company as is with no warranties. As is, Matthew repeated. We're not hiding anything, but we're not explaining anything either. Edward flipped to a tabbed page. This is the assumption of liabilities clause. 9 pages. Dense legal language. Key sentence. By accepting transfer, Preston personally assumes responsibility for all known and unknown company debts, obligations, bonds, leases, and legal liabilities. He signs he owns the debt, I said. Every penny. Edward hefted another stack. Asset and debt disclosure. 47 pages. Every equipment loan bond, IRS payment vendor account lease. It's all here. Dorothy documented everything. Matthew read over his shoulder. Mom really thought of everything. Your mother was the most thorough client I've ever had. She anticipated every argument, every loophole. She even predicted they'd refuse a forensic audit. Why would they refuse? Matthew asked. Edward smiled without humor. Because an audit costs $35,000 to $40,000 and takes 6 to 8 weeks. Vivian doesn't want to wait. She wants the company now while Warren's grieving and vulnerable. Dorothy knew they'd be too greedy to look closely. I stared at the paperwork. So what's the timeline? Edward pulled out a single sheet with a numbered list in Dorothy's handwriting, the same yellow legal pad from July. Phase 1. We present the settlement. Make it look like surrender, like you're too tired to fight. Graham Mitchell takes it to Vivian, and she'll push Preston to accept immediately. Phase 2. We suggest a forensic audit. Strongly. Make it clear they should have an independent accountant review the finances before Preston signs. Dorothy predicted they'll refuse, but legally we need to offer. Phase 3. The signing. Formal transfer ceremony. Notarized. Legally binding. Preston takes ownership of every asset and every debt. Phase 4. We watch. First equipment loan payment is due 30 days after transfer, $43,500. Then the IRS payment. Then the bond calls when projects start failing without Warren's relationships. Dorothy estimated 90 days before the structure collapses. Phase 5. You rebuild. Matthew takes the life insurance $675,000 and starts a new company. Small. Clean. No debt. Warren consults. You hire back loyal crew. And Preston learns what it costs to take something you didn't build. The room was quiet except for the old clock ticking. Matthew looked at me. Dad, are we really doing this? I thought about Dorothy at our kitchen table with that yellow legal pad. About her spending her last months building this instead of resting. About her crying over Vivian's email and then wiping her tears and getting to work. Your mother spent her last 8 months protecting you, I said slowly. She worked with Edward twice a week while dying to make sure you and Cooper would be safe. So yes, Matthew, we're doing this. Edward leaned back. Warren Dorothy made me promise something before she died. She made me swear I'd see this through with you, that I wouldn't let you back out. She said, Edward Preston needs to learn he can't take what he didn't build. And if Warren won't teach him, mathematics will. He slid a retainer agreement across the desk. Are you ready to honor Dorothy's wish? I picked up Edward's pen. Heavy, one of those old fountain pens that required actual pressure to write. I signed the retainer agreement. Edward would contact Graham Mitchell by end of day with our surrender offer. Edward called me on March 27th at 3:42 p.m. Warren, they rejected the forensic audit, just like Dorothy said they would. I was in the garage organizing Dorothy's gardening tools when my phone rang. I walked out to the driveway where the signal was clearer. Tell me, I said. Graham Mitchell called this morning. He presented our offer to Vivian and Preston on Monday. They want to move forward, but Vivian's demanding we waive the forensic audit requirement. Of course she is. She's calling it unnecessary and expensive, $35,000 to $40,000, 6 to 8 weeks delay. She wants it removed from the settlement terms. I leaned against my truck. What did you tell him? Exactly what Dorothy instructed. That we strongly recommend an independent financial review before Preston assumes control. That it's standard practice. That any reasonable person would want to know what they're inheriting. And Graham drafted a counter waiver. 3 pages. The core is simple. Preston accepts the company as is, waives all future claims, and voluntarily forgoes any independent financial review. Read me the exact language. Edward cleared his throat. Section 4, paragraph B. Recipient acknowledges receipt of comprehensive asset and debt disclosures dated March 23, 2024. Recipient voluntarily and knowingly waives right to independent financial review, forensic audit, or third-party verification. Recipient accepts all company assets, contracts, and obligations in their current state without warranty guarantee or representation as to accuracy or completeness. Preston's signing a paper saying he got the 47 pages and chose not to verify any of it. Exactly. And there's more. Section 6. Personal Guarantee. Recipient personally assumes full financial responsibility for all known and unknown company liabilities, including equipment loans, performance bonds, tax obligations, vendor debts, lease commitments, pending litigation, and any other obligations arising from operations. Dorothy had predicted this. Every word. She'd said they'd be too greedy, too eager to wait for an audit. Warren, Edward's voice pulled me back. Are you there? I'm here. I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain once Preston signs this and we execute the transfer, there's no taking it back? No do-overs. He'll own every debt, every bond that's going to fail. This will destroy him financially. It'll probably bankrupt him. I thought about my son, the boy with the plastic hard hat Dorothy bought him, teaching him to read a level when he was 7. Little league games. Dorothy beside me with lemonade and a scorecard. The day I caught him stealing $52,000. His face not shame, not remorse, but anger that I'd found out, showing up 23 minutes late to his mother's funeral. Dorothy wrote me a letter the night before she died, I said quietly. When she could barely hold a pen, she said some lessons can't be taught with words. They have to be learned through consequences. She said some sons can't be saved from themselves, but we can save the people who matter, Warren. I'm honoring my wife's wishes, Edward. She spent her last 8 months building this plan while dying. She worked with you twice a week when she should have been resting. She did this to protect Matthew and Cooper, and to teach Preston something he refused to learn any other way. Yes, I'm certain. Tell Graham we accept the counter waiver. Schedule the signing for April 2nd. A long pause. Graham wants to bring Preston in tomorrow to sign the waiver acknowledgement. The formal transfer ceremony will be April 2nd at 10 a.m. I'll need you and Matthew here. We'll be there. Warren, Dorothy told me you'd doubt yourself. She told me to remind you that you're not punishing Preston, you're teaching him. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it feels like I'm watching my son walk off a cliff, and I'm the one who built the path. You didn't build the path, Edward said firmly. Preston did. With every choice, every corner he cut, every person he betrayed. You and Dorothy are just stepping aside and letting him see where that path leads. There's a difference between causing harm and allowing consequences. I didn't have an answer. Call me if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll see you April 2nd at 9:45. He hung up. I stood in my driveway, phone in hand, staring at nothing. Then I got in my truck and drove. Mount Olivet Cemetery sits on a hillside in East Nashville, old oaks and worn headstones dating back to the 1800s. Dorothy and I had bought plots here 15 years ago. I'd buried her in the newer section, where the view looked out over the city. Her grave was easy to find. The mound of earth was still fresh. Someone, probably Matthew, had left a small potted plant where the headstone would eventually go. I stood there as the sun started to set. Dorothy, I said. My voice sounded loud in the quiet. They took the bait. Edward says Preston's signing the waiver tomorrow. He's going to own everything, every debt, every bond. And he's doing it without looking at the numbers because he's too proud and Vivian's too greedy to wait. A breeze moved through the oak trees. I'm scared this is too cruel. I'm scared I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm scared that 20 years from now, Matthew's going to ask me why I let this happen. I pulled a small bouquet of daisies from my jacket pocket, white and yellow, Dorothy's favorite. I'd stopped at a grocery store on the way. I set them on the fresh earth. But I trust you, I whispered. I've trusted you for 38 years, and I'm not going to stop now. You said this was the only way to protect our family. You said Preston needed to learn. So I'm going to see this through, I promise. The sky was almost dark when I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, looking back at Dorothy's grave in the rearview mirror. For the first time since she died, I felt her presence. Not as an absence, but as something solid beside me. Like she was sitting in the passenger seat the way she had 10,000 times before, her hand on my knee, trusting me to get us home. She'd planned every step, every document, every phase, every word in that waiver Preston was about to sign. All I had to do was follow through. I drove home in the dark, and for the first time in 15 days, I didn't feel alone. I arrived at Edward Harrison's office at 9:47 a.m. on April 2nd, 2024, 21 days after Dorothy died. Matthew was already in the parking lot leaning against his truck. He looked like he hadn't slept. Neither had I. We'd spent last night at my kitchen table going over the numbers one more time, making sure we understood exactly what we were about to do. "You ready?" he asked. I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. Edward's conference room was on the second floor. 8-person table, dark wood windows looking out over downtown Nashville. The documents were already laid out, thick stacks of paper, labeled with colored tabs arranged in perfect order. Edward stood at the head of the table in his outdated suit, looking every bit the small-town lawyer who'd spent 40 years doing wills and property transfers. "Warren, Matthew." He shook our hands. "We sit wherever you're comfortable." We took chairs on the near side of the table. I could see the folders from where I sat. Transfer agreement, asset schedule, debt disclosure, waiver of claims. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. Preston walked in first, wearing a suit that probably cost $3,000. Brittany followed in heels that clicked against the hardwood. Then Vivian Monroe, 63, gray hair in a perfect salon cut, carrying a designer purse. Vernon Monroe behind her, 59, thick around the middle, already pulling out his phone. And finally, Graham Mitchell, briefcase in hand, looking like a man who just won a case. They took the chairs across from us. Preston sat directly opposite me. Our eyes met for a second, and he smiled. Edward cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to execute a transfer of operational control and assets of Sullivan & Sons Construction from Warren Sullivan to Preston Sullivan. I've prepared all necessary documentation in accordance with Tennessee business law and the terms agreed upon by both parties." He picked up the first document. "This is the transfer agreement. Warren Sullivan voluntarily relinquishes all operational control, management authority, and asset possession of Sullivan & Sons Construction to Preston Sullivan, effective upon signing and notarization." He set it in front of me. "This is the asset schedule. Equipment appraised at $2.4 million. Accounts receivable $680,000. Cash on hand $180,000. All assets transfer with the company." He moved to the next stack. "This is the debt disclosure. 47 pages detailing all company liabilities, equipment loans, performance bonds, IRS payment obligations, vendor accounts, commercial lease commitments, and pending litigation. This document was provided to Mr. Preston Sullivan and his counsel on March 23rd. Graham Mitchell nodded. "We've reviewed the disclosure. And this," Edward said, picking up another document, "is the waiver of claims. Preston Sullivan acknowledges receipt of all financial disclosures, voluntarily waives the right to independent audit or verification. and accepts all company assets and liabilities in their current state. Preston Sullivan also agrees to personally guarantee all company debts and obligations. He looked directly at Preston. Mr. Sullivan Preston, you're assuming full responsibility for all company debts, including equipment loans with monthly payments of $43,500, performance bonds totaling $890,000, IRS payment plan of $8,900 monthly, and a commercial lease at $8,500 per month for the next 48 months. Do you understand what you're signing? Preston didn't hesitate. I built this company as much as my father did. I understand. Brittany smiled. Vivian nodded like a queen approving a decree. Vernon didn't look up from his phone. Edward turned to me. Mr. Sullivan Warren, do you wish to make a statement before we proceed? I looked at my son across the table, at the boy I'd raised, at the man he'd become. No, I said. This is what my wife wanted. I'm honoring her wishes. Preston's smile widened. Mom always knew I was the right one to run this company. Matthew's hand tightened on the armrest beside me. Edward slid the transfer agreement in front of me. Please sign and date here. I picked up the pen. My hand shook. I felt Matthew's hand on my shoulder, steady and solid. I signed my name, Warren James Sullivan. Dated it April 2nd, 2024, 10:08 a.m. Edward moved the document to Preston. Please sign here acknowledging acceptance of all terms and conditions. Preston signed with a flourish. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Edward notarized it with a stamp and a signature. Time 10 to 12 a.m. The waiver of claims came next. Preston signed that one even faster. Then the assumption of liabilities. Preston's signature bold and confident. Edward gathered all the documents, stamped the final page, and looked up. As of 10:23 a.m. on April 2nd, 2024, Sullivan & Sons Construction is under the ownership and operational control of Preston Sullivan. All assets, contracts, and obligations transfer effective immediately. Brittany stood and hugged Vivian. Vernon finally looked up from his phone and shook Preston's hand. Graham Mitchell pulled out an invoice for legal services, $8,400, half due today. Matthew and I stood. I didn't offer my hand to Preston, neither did Matthew. Congratulations, I said. My voice sounded hollow. We walked out. In the parking lot, Matthew stopped beside his truck. Dad. His voice was tight. Did we just make a terrible mistake? I looked back up at the second-floor window. Through the glass, I could see Preston laughing, gesturing with his hands, probably already planning what he'd do first. Your mother said to trust her, I said. So that's what we're doing. Matthew stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded and got in his truck. I sat in my own truck for a minute before starting the engine. My hands were still shaking. Dorothy, I hope you knew what you were doing. I drove to the address Dorothy had given me in her letter. A small warehouse space in Brentwood industrial area, month-to-month lease. The sign on the door was already up, Sullivan Construction, LLC. Opening soon. Not Sullivan & Sons, just Sullivan Construction. A new company, clean. No debt. No Preston. I stood there staring at that sign, doing the math in my head. Preston's first equipment loan payment was due in 30 days. $43,500. His bank account had $180,000 in it. He had 4 payments before the money ran out. Matthew and I had 27 days to get ready for what came next. Edward called me on April 30th at 7:52 a.m. Warren, it started. Preston just called me in a panic about the first equipment loan payment. I was making coffee in the kitchen, Dorothy's old percolator that took 10 minutes, but made coffee that actually tasted like something. I set down the pot and carried the phone to the table. "Tell me," I said. "The payment's due tomorrow, May 1st. $43,500. Edward's voice was steady, but I could hear the edge underneath. Preston just discovered his bank account is at $136,500. He started with $180 on April 2nd. I know. He's been burning through overhead for a month. I could hear him doing math in the background before he got on the line with me. He said April only brought in 2 small projects, $118,000 collected. After payroll, utilities, insurance, vendor payments, and the lease, his expenses hit $43,600 for the month. I did the math in my head. 180 minus 43.6 was 136.4. So he's got exactly enough to make the payment and have $92,900 left. That's what he figured out. Then he realized his next payroll is due May 15th, $42,000, which leaves him with $50,900. And another equipment payment due June 1st. Exactly. Edward paused. Warren, he asked me if he could negotiate the payment. Spread it out, delay it, work out some kind of arrangement with the lender. What did you tell him? I told him equipment loans don't negotiate. You pay the $43,500 on time or they start the repossession process. Those are the terms he signed. What did he say? He hung up on me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Dorothy had written that letter, where she'd drawn up the numbers on her yellow legal pad and shown me exactly how this would play out. Edward, thank you for letting me know. Warren, I have to ask, are you prepared for how fast this might move? If Preston misses that payment tomorrow, the lender can start proceedings immediately. We're talking days, not weeks. I'm prepared, I said. Dorothy spent 8 months preparing me. After Edward hung up, I sat there with my coffee and watched the sun come up through the kitchen window. Somewhere across town, my son was staring at a bank statement and realizing that the company he'd fought so hard to take was already strangling him. Dorothy had been right about the 90 days. We were 28 days in, and Preston was already drowning. That evening, Matthew came over for dinner. Claire came with him carrying a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. "Meatloaf," she said, setting it on the counter. "Your mom's recipe. Matthew said it was your favorite." It was. Dorothy used to make it every Sunday. The smell alone brought back 38 years of memories. We sat at the dining room table, the 3 of us in a house meant for 4. Claire served, while Matthew told me about the new job site they'd started in Brentwood. Small residential project, but clean work with a good client. "Raymond called me today," Matthew said halfway through dinner. He set down his fork. "He said Preston's been asking the crew to tighten their belts, delay expense reports, skip ordering supplies until the cash flow improves." I took a bite of meatloaf. It tasted exactly like Dorothy's. "What did Raymond say?" "He told Preston to shove it." Matthew almost smiled. Then he called me and said, "Tell your father I'm giving Preston 2 more weeks. After that, I'm out." I didn't spend 30 years building my reputation to watch it collapse under this kid. Claire looked between us. "Is Preston really in that much trouble?" "Yes," I said. "Are we just going to watch it happen?" Matthew reached over and took her hand. "Mom planned this, Claire. She spent the last 8 months of her life making sure Preston would take the company and everything that came with it. We're not watching it happen. We're honoring what she wanted." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Dad," Matthew said, "do you feel guilty?" I thought about that. About Preston at 7 years old with his plastic hard hat. About Preston at 16 framing his first wall. About Preston at 33 stealing $52,000 and blaming everyone but himself. About Preston at 41 showing up 23 minutes late to his mother's funeral. No, I said. I feel like I'm watching a car crash in slow motion that your mother predicted 8 months ago. Preston had the same numbers we did. He had 47 pages of disclosures. He had the option to get a forensic audit. He chose not to look because he was too proud, and Vivian was too greedy. This isn't happening to him. He did this to himself. Matthew nodded slowly. I keep reminding myself of that. After they left, I cleaned up the kitchen and walked through the house, turning off lights. In my bedroom, I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out Dorothy's letter. I'd read it a dozen times since that night in March, but I turned to the last page and read the final lines again. Let Preston learn what inheritance really means. Protect Matthew and Cooper. I love you. Chuti. I folded the letter and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow, Preston's first payment was due. $43,500. He'd make it barely, but the next one would come in 30 days, and the one after that, and eventually the math would run out. Dorothy had built the trap perfectly. All the moving parts, all the timelines, all the numbers that looked manageable on paper, but became impossible in practice. I got into bed and turned off the light. The first crack had formed, and just like Dorothy said, gravity would do the rest. Raymond Foster stopped by my house on May 2nd, his first visit since Dorothy's funeral. I was in the backyard pulling weeds from Dorothy's garden when I heard the truck pull into the driveway. I recognized the sound of the engine. Raymond had been driving the same Ford F-250 for 15 years. I set down the trowel and walked around front. Raymond stood by his truck, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 6 weeks. He was 54, built like a barrel with hands that could crush concrete, and a face that had spent 3 decades in the Tennessee sun. Raymond. I wiped dirt off my hands. Come on in. I'll make coffee. Don't need coffee, Warren. Just need to talk. We sat on the front porch. Raymond in Dorothy's rocking chair, the one she used to sit in every evening with her invoices. He didn't rock. I'm quitting, he said. Effective May 9th. That's 1 week from today. I'd known it was coming. Matthew had told me after Raymond's call, but hearing it face to face was different. Tell me what happened. Raymond pulled out his phone and showed me an email from Nashville Building Supply, dated May 1st. Subject line, urgent, account past due. We've worked with these guys since 1998, Raymond said. 28 years. Never missed a payment until Preston took over. Now we're $87,000 in the hole. March and April invoices $43,000 and $44,000. They sent this email yesterday saying we've got 7 days to pay in full or the account gets frozen. What did Preston say? Raymond's jaw tightened. He told me to call them and say we'd pay when cash flow improves. Warren, I've bought materials from Nashville Building Supply for 3 decades. I know the owner's kids' names. I was at his daughter's wedding. And Preston wants me to call him and basically say we're broke and he should just wait. You told Preston no. I told Preston I quit. I handed him my resignation letter this morning. He tried to talk me out of it. Offered me a raise. Can you believe that the company's drowning and he's offering raises? Raymond shook his head. I told him I'd stay through May 9th to close out the Donaldson project. After that, I'm done. He pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket and handed it to me. A resignation letter. Addressed to Sullivan and Sons Construction, Preston Sullivan, owner. I read it. I cannot in good conscience continue as foreman under leadership that jeopardizes vendor relationships and crew welfare. Effective May 9th, 2024, I resign my position. Raymond Foster. Formal, clean, final. Raymond, I said I can't stop you, but I can tell you this: Matthew and I are opening a new company. Sullivan Construction, LLC. Small crew, simple projects, no debt. Clean slate. If you're interested, give us a call in June when things settle. Raymond looked at me for a long moment. I'll be there, Warren. You know I will. I'm just sorry it came to this. So am I. He stood up. For what it's worth, Dorothy was the smartest woman I ever met. If she planned this, she had a reason. She did, I said. She was protecting Matthew and my grandson. Raymond nodded. Then she did right. After his truck pulled away, I went inside and called Edward. He answered on the first ring. Warren, I was about to call you. Graham Mitchell contacted me this morning. About the vendor situation. About how Preston's trying to handle it. Warren, he's maxing out personal credit cards to cover the $87,000. 3 cards. $35,000 at 19.99% APR. $30,000 at 22.5. $22,000 at 18.9. I did the math in my head. That's $87,000 in credit card debt at roughly 20% average interest. $17,400 in interest alone over the next year. And that's assuming he can make the monthly minimums, which at this rate he can't. How did Graham find out? Preston called him asking if there was a legal way to force the vendor to extend the payment terms. Graham told him no, and asked how he planned to pay. Preston admitted he was using personal credit. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Dorothy had drawn up her numbers, where she'd predicted exactly this scenario. Edward, Dorothy estimated 90 days before the collapse. We're 30 days in. I know. And Warren, this is accelerating. The vendor account freeze means Preston can't order materials for active projects. Without materials, projects stall. Without completed projects, there's no revenue. It's a death spiral. That's what Dorothy counted on. Edward was quiet for a moment. Are you okay with how fast this is moving? I thought about Raymond's resignation letter, about Preston maxing out credit cards at 20% interest, about the vendor relationships my wife and I had spent 38 years building, all crashing down in 30 days. Dorothy spent 8 months planning this, I said. She knew exactly how fast it would move. I'm just following her blueprint. After Edward hung up, I walked out to the garage. I'd been avoiding it since Dorothy died. Too many memories of her organizing tools, labeling bins, keeping everything in perfect order. Her tool belt still hung on the wall where she'd left it, brown leather worn smooth from 20 years of use. Her initials were embroidered on the strap in white thread, DAS, Dorothy Ann Sullivan. I touched the leather. It was cool and soft under my fingers. You were right, I whispered to the empty garage. You were always right. Dorothy had known Preston would panic, known he'd make desperate moves like maxing out credit cards, known Raymond would quit rather than watch the company's reputation collapse. She'd built the trap so carefully that every move Preston made just tightened the noose. I stood there for a long time holding that tool belt and felt the weight of what we were doing. Not guilt, not regret. Just the heavy certainty that Dorothy's plan was working exactly as she'd designed it, and there was nothing I could do now but watch it play out. Matthew called me on May 9th at 11:34 a.m. Dad, the Silverstone project just got canceled. The bond company's pulling out. I was at the new office in Brentwood helping install shelving in what would be our tool storage room. The space was small, 800 square feet, cinder block walls, concrete floor, but it was ours. Clean. No debt. No history. I set down the drill and stepped outside where the signal was better. Tell me what happened. I got a call from Luis Martinez. He was on Preston's crew until yesterday. He said the Silverstone Medical Plaza job got shut down. $2.1 million contract. Biggest project on the books. Why'd it get shut down? The bond company revoked the performance bond. Sure Bond, Tennessee. They sent a notice yesterday saying Preston failed to meet payment obligations and lost key personnel. Raymond's resignation triggered an automatic review. I leaned against the building. The sun was hot on the back of my neck. How much was the bond? $340,000. And Dad's Silverstone Development already hired a new contractor. They're suing Preston for $125,000 in delay damages. The project was supposed to be done in 8 weeks. Now it's getting restarted from scratch. $340,000. Gone. Just like Dorothy said it would be. There's more, Matthew said. His voice was tight. The IRS sent Preston a late fee notice. He missed the May payment, $8,900. The penalty's $445 plus interest. And Gail called me this morning. Gail Horvath. Our bookkeeper. Dorothy had hired her 12 years ago. Yeah. She said Preston's payroll account is short $4,900 for this week's checks. He's asking the crew to take partial pay until cash improves. I closed my eyes. $4,900 short on a payroll of 12 guys meant Preston couldn't even cover half his crew. How many are left? I asked. Luis said 3 guys walked off the Donaldson site this morning. Preston offered them $400 cash each instead of their $1,200 paychecks. They told him to shove it. So out of 12 crew members, 7 quit this week. Preston's down to 5 guys, and they're all looking for exits. After Matthew hung up, I stood in the parking lot of our empty office and did the math. 37 days since Preston signed the papers. Dorothy had written day 30 to 40 bonds fail crew walks on her timeline. She'd been off by exactly 1 week. That afternoon, I drove past the old office. I didn't plan to. I was heading to the hardware store for more shelving brackets, and the route took me through the gulch. When I saw the building, I slowed down. The parking lot was empty. It was noon on a Thursday. The place should have been buzzing. Trucks coming and going, crews loading materials, phones ringing. Instead, nothing. Preston's black truck sat by the front door, Brittany's white SUV beside it, and Vivian's silver Cadillac, the one with the vanity plates that said, Boss Lady. Through the second-floor windows, so I could see lights on in the conference room. 3 silhouettes. A meeting. Probably trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. I didn't stop. Didn't slow down any more than I already had. Just kept driving. If Preston had looked out that window, he would have seen his father driving past the company he used to own. The company Preston had fought so hard to take. The company that was now collapsing around him 37 days later. But I don't think he was looking out windows. I think he was staring at spreadsheets that didn't add up and bank statements that were draining faster than he could fill them. That evening, Matthew stopped by the house. He looked exhausted. Long day, I asked. Long week. He sat at the kitchen table, the same spot he'd sat 1,000 times growing up. Dad, I know this was Mom's plan. I know she spent 8 months working on it. But watching it happen in real time, it's brutal. I poured us both coffee. What's brutal about it? Preston's going to lose everything. The company, his savings, probably his house. Bankruptcy lawsuits destroyed credit. And we're just watching. Your mother watched Preston steal $52,000 from us in 2016, I said. She watched him blame everyone but himself. She watched him show up 23 minutes late to her funeral. She knew exactly how brutal he could be. This isn't happening to him, Matthew. This is math catching up with choices he made. Matthew was quiet for a moment. Do you think he understands that yet? No. Right now he thinks he's unlucky. He thinks the bond company's being unreasonable. He thinks the crew's being disloyal. He thinks the IRS is being inflexible. It'll be a while before he realizes the common denominator is him. Will he ever realize it? I thought about that. About Preston maxing out credit cards. About him offering $400 cash payments to guys who earn $1,200. About him sitting in that conference room with Vivian and Brittany, probably blaming me for setting him up. I don't know, I said honestly. Your mother hoped he would. That's why she built the lesson this way. But some people never learn. They just get angry at whoever's teaching. After Matthew left, I went to the bedroom and pulled out Dorothy's folder, the one she'd labeled Sullivan Estate Contingency Plan. I'd looked through it a dozen times since March, but tonight I went straight to the timeline page, the yellow legal pad with her neat handwriting. Day 1 to 10. Transfer complete, Preston takes control. Day 11 to 20, first payment crisis, cash flow problems emerge. Day 21 to 30, vendor relationships strain. Key personnel consider leaving day 30 to 40. Bonds fail, crew walks, projects collapse. Day 41 to 60, bankruptcy likely. Personal liability triggered, day 61 to 90. Complete dissolution I counted forward from April 2nd. Today was May 9th, day 37. The Silverstone bond had failed yesterday. 7 crew members had quit this week. Preston was offering partial pay. Dorothy's note at the bottom of the page read, "Timeline may vary plus or minus 7 to 10 days depending on Preston's decisions. But the math doesn't change. The outcome doesn't change." I drove past the old office again on May 24th. The parking lot was empty, and an eviction notice was taped to the front door. I'd been avoiding that route for 2 weeks, but that morning I had a meeting with a supplier in East Nashville, and the fastest way took me through the gulch. When I saw the building, I pulled into the lot. The notice was printed on bright yellow paper. Hard to miss. Commercial lease violation tenant has failed to pay rent for May 2024, $8,500 due May 1st. Tenant must vacate premises by June 1st, 2024, or face legal action for breach of contract and eviction proceedings. I stood there reading it twice. 52 days. That's how long it took. Dorothy had said 90 days. Preston hadn't made it to 60. I got back in my truck and called Edward. "I'm looking at an eviction notice on the old office door," I said. "I know. Graham Mitchell called me yesterday." Edward's voice was heavy. "Warren Preston filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy on May 18th, 6 weeks after he took the company." 6 weeks. "Tell me the rest," I said. "The equipment got repossessed, sold at auction for about $890,000, barely covered half the loan. Preston's personally liable for the shortfall, about $1.3 million. The bonding company called all the performance bonds, $340 on Silverstone, another $180 on smaller projects. $520,000 total, and they're suing Preston personally because the company's insolvent." I closed my eyes and listened. The IRS revoked the payment plan and filed a lien, $320,000, against Preston and what's left of the company. Nashville Building Supplies suing for the $87,000 vendor debt plus interest. The credit card's $87,000 at 20% are headed to collections. And the landlord suing for 6 months' rent, $51,000. How much total personal liability? About $680,000. That's what Preston personally owes after the bankruptcy clears out the company. Equipment loan, shortfall bonds, credit cards, lease guarantee. He signed personal guarantees on all of it. I thought about Preston sitting in that conference room with Vivian and Brittany, confident and smiling, signing paper after paper without reading them. Warren Preston called Graham yesterday asking if you'd be willing to buy the company back. Restructure it, take over the debts, give him another chance. What did you tell him? I told him there's nothing left to buy. The company's worth negative $1.8 million now. It's a crater. After Edward hung up, I sat in that empty parking lot for a long time. Through the windows, I could see the conference room where we'd signed the papers, the table where Preston had smiled and said, "Mom always knew I was the right one to run this company." 8 weeks later, it was gone. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello, Warren," Brittany's voice, crying. "You did this on purpose. You set Preston up." I'd been expecting this call, dreading it maybe, but not surprised. "Brittany, don't. Just don't. You and Dorothy planned this whole thing. You gave Preston the company knowing it would destroy him. You knew. To your mother." I said quietly, sent an email to Vivian Monroe on June 14, 2023. I have a copy. In it, she outlined a plan to wait until Dorothy died and then take the company while I was grieving. The percentages were spelled out. 40% for Preston, 30 for Vivian, 20 for Vernon, 10 for you. Tanner's MBA fund. The whole thing. Silence. Dorothy found that email. I continued. She spent her last 8 months building a plan to protect Matthew and Cooper. She gave Preston exactly what he demanded, a company worth negative $3 million that would collapse without the relationships I'd spent 38 years building. Preston signed 47 pages of disclosures. He waived a forensic audit. He chose not to look at the numbers because he was too proud and your mother was too greedy. "We're losing our house," Brittany said. Her voice broke. "Cooper keeps asking why his daddy's angry all the time, why we can't afford things anymore. What am I supposed to tell him?" "Brittany, where was Preston when Dorothy was dying? Where was he when she took her last breath?" No answer. "He was planning this takeover. He didn't come to the hospital. He showed up 23 minutes late to her funeral. And now he's learning what it costs to take something you didn't build." She hung up. I sat there with the dead phone in my hand and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just exhaustion. That evening I drove to Mount Olivet Cemetery. Dorothy's headstone had been installed, gray granite, simple and clean. Her name. Her dates. And the words we'd chosen together 15 years ago when we bought the plots. Dorothy Ann Sullivan, 1962 to 2024. Beloved wife, mother builder, she built with love. I knelt down and set a small bouquet of daisies against the stone. "Dorothy," I said. My voice sounded loud in the quiet. "It's happening exactly like you said. Preston filed bankruptcy 6 weeks after taking the company. He's personally liable for $680,000. The office got evicted. Brittany called me crying, and I don't feel the way I thought I would." The wind moved through the oak trees. I thought I'd feel satisfied, vindicated maybe, like justice had been done. But I just feel tired. Watching our son destroy himself even when he deserved the lesson, it's still watching our son suffer. I touched the cold granite. "I hope you were right about this," I whispered. "I hope Preston learns something. Because if he doesn't, then all of this, all the planning, all the pain, was just cruelty." I stood up, knees aching, and walked back to my truck. I drove home in the dark, and for the first time since Dorothy died, I felt doubt. Not about the plan, not about the math, but about whether Preston was capable of learning what Dorothy tried to teach him. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:15. Matthew. Dad, you're not going to believe this. Preston just showed up at our job site. He wants to talk to you. He's asking for work. Edward forwarded me an email chain on July 18th, 4 months after Dorothy died, with the subject line, FDWW. You need to see this. I was at the new office going over payroll with Matthew. We had 6 employees now, Raymond. 3 crew members from the old company who'd quit when Preston took over, and 2 new hires. Small operation, clean books, no debt. My phone chimed. I opened Edward's email and saw the attachment. What is it? Matthew asked. I don't know yet. I clicked the file. The email chain was dated June 14th, 2023, over a year ago, from Vivian Monroe to Vernon Monroe and Brittany Sullivan. Subject timeline, Sullivan Construction Acquisition. I started reading. Vernon Brittany, attached, is the preliminary breakdown. Dorothy's diagnosis is 6 to 12 months according to what Preston told us. We wait until she passes, then move immediately while Warren is grieving and vulnerable. Percentages as discussed. Preston 40% controlling interest. Me 30%. Vernon 20%, Brittany 10%. Tanner gets $50,000 from first-year profits for his MBA program at Vanderbilt. Target sale price $8 to $10 million within 18 months of acquisition. Preston takes the title and runs operations. We take the money and exit clean. Key move fast. Warren is 64 and emotional. Graham Mitchell says conservatorship is the easiest legal route if he resists. We frame it as helping him through his grief. Critical Preston doesn't know the full plan yet. Keep him thinking this is about his legacy and rightful place in the company. He's easier to control when he thinks it's his idea. Once we have the company, we can handle Preston however we need to. This is happening, Vernon? 50 years building that dry cleaning business taught me one thing. You don't leave money on the table when someone else is too weak to pick it up. -V, I read it twice. Then I scrolled down to Edward's note at the bottom. Warren, Graham Mitchell sent this to me last week. He's withdrawing as Vivian's counsel. Says he didn't know about the email when he took the case and feels he was misled about the nature of the dispute. He thought you should have it for your records. The original is date-stamped June 14th, 2023, 5 weeks before Dorothy started working with me on the contingency plan. Edward. I set down the phone. Dad, Matthew was watching me. What is it? I handed him the phone. He read in silence, his face going hard. Jesus, he said quietly. Mom found this on Brittany's laptop. That's what started everything. That's why Dorothy built the plan. Matthew read it again. Preston doesn't know the full plan yet. Keep him thinking it's his idea. He looked up. They were using him. I know. Does this change anything? I thought about that. About Preston signing the papers. About him taking the company. About him refusing the forensic audit because he was too proud to admit he needed help. No, I said. It doesn't change anything. Preston still made his choices. He still signed 47 pages of disclosures. He still chose not to look at the numbers. But it explains something your mother wrote in her letter. What? She said some sons can't be saved from themselves. She knew Vivian had manipulated him. She knew he was being used, but she also knew he was choosing to go along with it because it gave him what he wanted, a way to take the company without earning it. Matthew handed back my phone. Are you going to show this to Preston? I don't know yet. That afternoon, I printed the email and added it to Dorothy's folder. The folder I'd been keeping since March, the one with her letter, her timeline, her financial projections. Now it had proof that Preston hadn't been the mastermind. He'd been the tool. Vivian Monroe had played all of us. She'd used Preston's pride and resentment. She'd exploited Dorothy's death. She'd planned to sell the company and cut Preston out once the money was in hand. The irony was that Dorothy had seen it all coming, and instead of fighting it, she'd used it. She'd given them exactly what they wanted, knowing it would destroy them. I sat at my desk for a long time holding that printed email. Then I got in my truck and drove. I didn't decide where I was going until I pulled up in front of Preston's rental house in Antioch, a small duplex, probably $950 a month. His truck was in the narrow driveway covered in construction dust. I sat in my truck across the street and watched. Through the front window, I could see into the living room. Preston sat on a worn couch, still in his work clothes. Cooper, 9 years old now, getting tall, sat beside him. They were watching television, some cartoon with bright colors. Preston looked thin, tired. The kind of tired that comes from working 10-hour days for $18 an hour when you used to own a company. Cooper leaned against his father's shoulder. Preston's arm was around him. I watched them for maybe 5 minutes. Father and son. Preston had lost everything: the company, his savings, his house, his marriage. Brittany had filed for separation in June. He was facing $680,000 in personal debt that would follow him for years. But he still had his son. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I wondered if that was the real lesson Dorothy had been trying to teach. Not about business or money or consequences, about what actually mattered when everything else was stripped away. I started the truck and drove away without knocking. Preston didn't need to see that email. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What he needed was to keep showing up, to keep working, to keep being a father to Cooper. The email proved that Vivian had manipulated him, that he'd been used, but it didn't change the fact that Preston had made choices. Bad choices. Choices driven by pride and greed and resentment. Dorothy's plan hadn't been about revenge. It had been about teaching Preston what mattered. And maybe, just maybe, sitting on that couch with his arm around his son, Preston was finally starting to learn. I drove home in the summer twilight and thought about Dorothy. About her spending her last months planning this elaborate trap. About her dying with the knowledge that she wouldn't be here to see if it worked. I hoped she could see it now. See Preston on that couch with Cooper. See him working for Matthew. See him learning slowly and painfully what it meant to build something worth keeping. I drove away without knocking. Dorothy's plan wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching Preston what actually mattered. I just hoped he was ready to learn. I pulled up to Matthew's Brentwood job site on a September morning and saw Preston's truck already there, parked crooked near the lumber pile, dusty and dented, the same spot it had occupied since 6:45 a.m. It was a 20-unit housing development framing stage, and the sound of saws and hammers echoed across the lot. I stepped out of my truck and spotted Preston immediately, not because he stood out, but because he didn't. He wore a faded Carhartt jacket, jeans stained with sawdust, and steel-toed boots caked in dried mud. His tool belt sagged on his hips, the leather cracked and worn. No designer clothes, no $3,000 suit, just a man who'd shown up before dawn to work. He was teaching a 19-year-old kid how to read a speed square, his hands patient on the tool, his voice low and clear. See this line, that's your cut. You measure twice because wood's expensive, and mistakes cost the crew time. The kid nodded wide-eyed, and Preston handed him the saw. Your turn. I'll watch. I stayed by my truck, watching. 6 months ago, Matthew had hired him at $18 an hour, the same rate we paid first-year apprentices. Preston had taken it without negotiation, without complaint. He'd shown up early, stayed late, and kept his mouth shut. Matthew told me he was good with the younger guy's patient. Careful, the kind of teacher who remembered what it felt like not to know. It was hard to reconcile this man with the one who'd stolen $52,000 from us 8 years ago. With the one who'd missed his mother's death because he had other things to do. With the one who'd arrived 23 minutes late to her funeral. But Dorothy had seen something in him I hadn't. Or maybe she'd seen something that could be built if everything else was stripped away first. That evening, we gathered for Sunday dinner at my house, the same table Dorothy had set for 37 years. Matthew and Claire arrived first. Claire wore an engagement ring, now a small diamond, that caught the kitchen light, and she helped me pull the fried chicken from the oven while Matthew set the table. Preston came next, Cooper trailing behind him in a Titans jersey 2 sizes too big. The boy looked healthier than he had in July, less pale, more animated. He climbed into the chair next to Preston and started talking about a treehouse he wanted to build, and Preston listened the way fathers should, fully, without checking his phone. We ate Dorothy's Sunday menu: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, sweet tea, so cold it fogged the glasses. For a while no one mentioned the company or the bankruptcy or the 18 months that had passed since Dorothy died. Then Matthew set down his fork and looked at Preston. "You've been with us 6 months," he said. "You show up on time, you work hard, the crew likes you. I want to bump you to $20 an hour." Preston shook his head before Matthew finished. "I appreciate it, but I'd rather earn the 20 first. Ask me again in 3 months. Cooper looked up at his father, something like pride flickering across his face, and I felt my throat tighten. Matthew nodded. "Fair enough." After dinner, Matthew disappeared upstairs. When he came back, he was holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax, the same kind Dorothy had used for important documents. He set it on the table in front of Preston. "Mom left this," Matthew said quietly. "She told me to give it to you when you were ready to hear it." Preston stared at the envelope. His name was written across the front, in Dorothy's slanted cursive for Preston. "When he's ready to hear it. July 18th, 2023. He broke the seal and unfolded 3 pages of notebook paper covered in Dorothy's handwriting. His hands shook as he read the first line aloud. "Preston, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I'm gone, and you've finally shown up. Not to my deathbed, you missed that. Not to my funeral on time, you were 23 minutes late in a suit that cost more than most men earn in a month. But here now, to this moment. So maybe there's hope. I'm not writing this to punish you, son. I'm writing because I love you too much to watch you destroy yourself. You stole $52,000 from your father and me in 2016. You've spent 20 years believing you deserved things you didn't earn: respect. You didn't build money. You didn't make a company you never helped create. So I built you a trap. The company you demanded was worth negative $2.9 million. Every asset carried debt. Every contract required relationships you never built. I gave you exactly what you wanted, knowing it would collapse under the weight of your entitlement. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted to save you. This letter is your real inheritance, Preston. Not money, a lesson. Nothing you don't build yourself can ever truly belong to you. If Matthew hired you, work harder than anyone. If Cooper still loves you, become the father he deserves. If your father will still speak to you, spend the rest of your life earning back what you stole, not the $52,000, but his trust. Real wealth is built with calloused hands, alarm clocks set before dawn, and showing up when it's hard. It's your son's respect, your brother's trust, your father's forgiveness. Not words, Preston, actions, scar tissue, persistence. I pray you're reading this in work boots, not dress shoes. I pray your hands hurt. I pray you've learned. That's your inheritance, son. The chance to become the man I always believed you could be. I love you. I always did. Mom. Preston set the letter down. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Cooper climbed into his lap and wrapped his arms around his father's neck. And Preston held him tight, his face buried in the boy's hair. I reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. "She always loved you, son," I said quietly. "Even when she was toughest on you." Preston nodded, still unable to speak. The next morning, Preston's alarm went off at 5:15 a.m., and for the first time in 20 years, he didn't hit snooze. Still watching Drop 515 below, if you understood the significance of that alarm clock moment, it's the heart of everything Dorothy was teaching. Before we wrap up, this story uses creative storytelling to examine meaningful lessons about inheritance and redemption. If this approach doesn't suit your taste, feel free to stop here. I sat in the back row of the Davidson County Family Courtroom on December 12, 2025, 21 months to the day since Dorothy died. The room smelled like floor polish and bitter courthouse coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a cold, institutional glare. Preston sat at the petitioner's table in a pressed navy button-down and khakis, his hands folded on a manila folder. No lawyer beside him. Brittany sat across the aisle with her attorney, a sharp woman in a gray pantsuit who kept tapping a gold pen against her leather briefcase. Cooper wasn't there. Judge Pearson had ruled the boy didn't need to testify, he was only 10, and this wasn't a contested abuse case. It was a modification hearing. Preston wanted 50-50 custody. Brittany wanted to keep things as they were, Tuesday and Thursday overnights, alternating weekends. I hadn't told Preston I was coming. Matthew knew he was waiting outside in his truck engine running, in case I needed to leave fast. But this was something Preston needed to do alone. Judge Angela Pearson was a black woman in her mid-50s with silver-framed reading glasses and a reputation for cutting through nonsense. She called the case at 9:47 a.m. Sullivan versus Sullivan modification of parenting plan. "Mr. Sullivan, you're appearing pro se." Preston stood. "Yes, Your Honor. You're petitioning for equal parenting time." "Yes, ma'am. 50-50 joint physical custody." She nodded and gestured to the folder in front of him. "You've submitted evidence to support this request." "Yes, Your Honor." He slid the folder across the bench to the clerk, who passed it up. Judge Pearson opened it and began reading aloud, her voice neutral and deliberate. "Employment verification from Sullivan Construction, LLC. Current wage $22 per hour. Employed continuously for 21 months. She glanced up. "Your employer is—" "My brother, Your Honor, Matthew Sullivan." And prior to this employment, Preston's jaw tightened. "I was unemployed, Your Honor. I filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy in May 2024 after losing the family business due to poor financial management." Brittany's lawyer smirked. Judge Pearson didn't look up. "Rental payment history. Current address." She squinted at the page. "Antioch, Tennessee. $950 per month. 21 months of on-time payments, no late fees." "Yes, ma'am." "School attendance documentation." She flipped through 3 stapled pages covered in handwritten dates. 21 months of drop-offs and pickups for Cooper Sullivan at Andrew Jackson Elementary. Perfect attendance, not a single missed day. Preston nodded. "Savings account statement. Current balance $7,200? "Yes, Your Honor." She picked up a single typed page. Character reference from Raymond Foster, construction foreman. He writes, "I have known Preston Sullivan for 12 years. 21 months ago, I would not have trusted him to hold a level. Today, I trust him to lead my crew, manage my projects, and represent my reputation. He is punctual, humble, and one of the most reliable men I have supervised." Judge Pearson set the letter down and lifted another sheet, this one on school letterhead. Statement from Cooper's fourth-grade teacher at Andrew Jackson Elementary. Quote, Preston Sullivan is present and supportive. He attends every parent-teacher conference, volunteers for field trips, and checks homework nightly. Cooper thrives emotionally and academically during the weeks he spends with his father. She closed the folder and looked at Preston over her reading glasses. Mr. Sullivan, tell me in your own words why I should grant you equal custody. Preston stood straighter. His voice was steady, no waver. Your Honor, I'm not here to make excuses. 21 months ago, I lost everything because I didn't earn it. I took what wasn't mine and believed I deserved it just because of my last name. I failed my family. I failed my father. And I failed my son. He paused, his palms flat on the table. I'm asking for 50-50 custody because I've spent every day since proving I can be the father Cooper deserves. I show up. I work. I save. I don't miss a day, not one. And when Cooper's with me, he knows I'm there not because a court order says I have to be, but because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Judge Pearson studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to Brittany's attorney. Counsel, does your client oppose this modification? The lawyer stood smoothly. Your Honor, Ms. Sullivan believes the current arrangement serves the child's best interest. Mr. Sullivan's financial history raises legitimate concerns about long-term stability. He's been employed 21 months, Judge Pearson interrupted. He saved $7,200 on a $22 hourly wage while paying child support, rent, and living expenses. That's not instability, counsel. That's discipline. The lawyer sat down. Judge Pearson folded her hands and looked directly at Preston. The court finds clear evidence of sustained behavioral change. Mr. Preston Sullivan has demonstrated consistent employment, financial responsibility, and active parental involvement over an extended period of time. Petition for joint physical custody is granted. 50-50 parenting schedule effective immediately. Clerk will prepare the amended order. She brought the gavel down, once a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. Preston exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 21 months. He mouthed thank you, but Judge Pearson had already moved on to the next case. I waited for him in the parking lot. He came out 15 minutes later, folder tucked under one arm, blinking in the December sunlight. When he saw me leaning against my truck, he stopped mid-step. Dad. Heard you won, I said quietly. He nodded, his throat working. Yeah. I pushed off the truck and walked toward him. Your mother would be proud of you, son. His face crumpled. He crossed the asphalt in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around me, the first time he'd hugged me in 3 years. He smelled like nervous sweat and cheap aftershave, and his shoulders shook hard. I hope so, Dad, he whispered against my shoulder. I hope so. I held him tight and let him cry. When he finally pulled back, he wiped his eyes with the heels of his hands and gave me a shaky smile. I gotta go pick up Cooper, he said. Tell him the news. Go, I said. He's waiting. Preston climbed into his truck, a dusty blue 2019 Silverado he'd bought with cash 6 months earlier for $14,500. The engine coughed to life and he backed out carefully, one hand raised in a wave. I watched Preston drive away in his 2019 Silverado, the truck he'd bought with cash for $14,500, and felt something I hadn't felt in nearly 2 years, hope. I set the table for 5 people on Sunday, the December 15th, 2025, 3 days after the custody hearing, using Dorothy's best china for the first time since she died. The dishes were cream-colored, with thin gold trim, delicate enough that I was always afraid I'd break one. Dorothy had only used them for special occasions, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the night Matthew got his contractor's license. Now they sat on the oak table she'd refinished by hand in 1992, catching the winter sunlight that poured through the kitchen window. Matthew and Claire arrived first at 4:30. Claire was 5 months pregnant now, her belly starting to show beneath a loose sweater. She wore the engagement ring Matthew had given her in October, a small diamond on a silver band, nothing fancy, but she never took it off. She hugged me at the door and immediately started helping me pull the fried chicken from the oven. Preston and Cooper showed up 10 minutes later. Preston carried a store-bought pecan pie. "I know it's not as good as yours, Dad, but I tried." And Cooper ran straight to the table, eyes wide. "Grandpa, are those Grandma's fancy plates?" "They are," I said. "Does that mean it's a special occasion?" "It does." Cooper grinned and climbed into the chair that used to be Dorothy's, and I didn't have the heart to stop him. We ate Dorothy's Sunday menu fried chicken so crisp it crackled when you bit into it. Mashed potatoes whipped with butter and cream, green beans cooked with bacon, and sweet tea so cold the glasses fogged in your hand. For dessert, Claire had baked a peach pie, using Dorothy's recipe, the crust golden and flaky, and Cooper ate 2 slices before anyone could stop him. Halfway through the meal, Matthew cleared his throat. "Dad, I want to talk business for a minute." I nodded. Preston set down his fork. "We just finished the year-end numbers for Sullivan Construction, LLC, Matthew said. 19 months, May 2024 through December 2025. $1.35 million in revenue. 0 debt. 6 employees, including Raymond and Gail. We're projecting $1.5 million for 2026. Claire squeezed his hand. I felt my chest tighten. "Ownership split like Mom set it up," Matthew continued. 60% me, 30% you, 10% in trust for Cooper. Office rents $2,400 a month in Brentwood. We own all the equipment, outright bought it with the life insurance money. No loans, no liens, nothing we didn't pay for." He looked at Preston. "You've been with us 21 months, Preston. You've earned every dollar at 22 an hour. You've shown up, worked hard, and earned the crew's respect. So I'm making you an offer." Preston's face went still. "If you stay 3 more years and keep proving yourself, you'll earn 5% equity in the company. Not a gift, not because you're my brother. Something you build. Something you earn." Preston stared at his plate for a long moment. Then he looked up. "I'll work for it," he said quietly. "But I won't take it until I've proven I deserve it. Ask me again in 3 years. Matthew smiled. "Fair enough." Cooper looked between them confused, and Claire leaned over to whisper something in his ear. The boy nodded solemnly, like he'd just been let in on an important secret. Preston turned to me. "Dad, do you ever regret it? Letting them take the old company, watching it collapse?" I set down my fork and met his eyes. "Not 1 second, son." "Why not?" "Because your mother taught me something I didn't understand at first. You can't save people from the lessons they need to learn. You wanted that company, you thought you deserved it, just because your last name was on the sign. But you didn't build it. You didn't earn it. And when it fell apart, it taught you something I could never have taught you with words." Preston's throat worked. He nodded. "Chuku, what did it teach you?" Cooper asked, suddenly looking up at his father. Preston reached over and ruffled his son's hair. "That nothing really belongs to you unless you build it yourself, buddy." Cooper thought about that for a moment, then turned to me. "Grandpa, tell me how Grandma started the company. Mom says she was younger than Dad is now." I smiled and leaned back in my chair. "Your grandma was 24 years old in 1986. She bought a beat-up Ford truck for $800, borrowed my tools because she didn't have her own yet, and took a job fixing a sagging porch in East Nashville for $800. She worked 16-hour days, saved every penny, and treated every customer like family. When people asked her why she worked so hard, she'd say, because I'm building something that'll last longer than I will. I looked around the table at Matthew, who had Dorothy's steady hands, at Preston, who finally understood what it meant to build something, at Cooper, who was just beginning to learn, at Claire, who carried the next generation. She built this company $1 at a time, one house at a time, one handshake at a time. And when she was done, it wasn't just a business, it was a legacy. Cooper nodded his eyes wide, and I could see Dorothy in the way he listened, the way he leaned forward like every word mattered. That night, after everyone had gone home, I pulled the lockbox from under the bed. Inside was one final envelope, Dorothy's last letter to me with handwritten instructions. Open on the night of December 12th, 2025, 21 months after I'm gone. 3 days earlier, on the night of December 12th, I opened the envelope at 10:15 p.m. on December 12th, 2025, 21 months and 3 hours after Dorothy died. At 6:47 a.m. on March 12th, 2024. I sat alone in our bedroom, the same room where she'd spent her final weeks. Her wedding photo from 1986 sat on the nightstand, Dorothy at 24, in a simple white dress, me at 26, in a borrowed suit, both of us grinning like we'd just won the lottery. In a way, we had. The envelope was sealed with red wax, the same kind she'd used for the other letters. My hands shook as I broke it open and unfolded 3 pages of notebook paper, covered in her slanted handwriting. My dearest Warren, if you're reading this, 21 months have passed. By now you know whether my plan worked. If Preston is still working with Matthew, I won. If Cooper still loves his father, I won. If you're still standing and Matthew's company is thriving, when real wealth isn't what you inherit, Warren. It's what you build with your own hands. Now I have 5 final things to ask of you. First, forgive Preston completely. Not because he deserved it from the start, but because you deserve to be free. Bitterness will kill you faster than any disease killed me. Second, let Matthew lead. Our son is ready. You've taught him everything, now trust him. Third, spoil Cooper. Buy him ice cream, teach him to hammer a nail, tell him stories about his grandmother. That's our legacy, not money, but memories. Fourth, live Warren. Don't spend the next 20 years mourning me. I give you permission to laugh, to travel, to sleep late on Sundays, and even to love again if you find someone. I won't be jealous, I promise. Fifth, remember that we won. Vivian Monroe thought she was taking our legacy, but all she took was a trap and a lesson. Our family still stands. Our name is still whole. And Preston finally became the man I always believed he could be. I love you, Warren Sullivan. I loved you in 1984 when you taught me how to hold a hammer. I loved you when we built this company from nothing. I loved you through every hard day, every loan, every failed project, and every victory. I'll be waiting for you. But take your time, my love. You still have work to do. Forever yours, Dorothy. I cried for the first time since her funeral. Not the silent tears I'd shed alone in the truck, or the quiet grief I'd carried for 21 months. This was loud, ugly sobbing, the kind that shook my whole body and left me gasping for air. I clutched the letter to my chest and whispered to the empty room. We did it, Dorothy. Preston came back. Matthew's leading. Cooper's happy. We won, sweetheart. We won. The next morning, I drove to Mount Olivet Cemetery at 6:45 a.m. just as the sun broke over the hills. I carried a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums, her favorite flower, the kind she used to plant along the fence every spring. The grass was wet with dew, and my boots left dark prints as I walked to her grave. The headstone was simple gray granite, the inscription exactly what she'd requested in her will. Dorothy Ann Sullivan, 1962 to 2024. Founder, mother, builder. Real wealth is what you build with your own hands. I knelt in the cold grass and set the flowers at the base of the stone, Then I unfolded her letter and read it aloud, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. When I finished, I pressed my palm flat against the cold granite. I'll see you again, Dorothy, but not yet. I still have work to do. I drove to Matthew's job site that morning. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I didn't feel Dorothy's absence. I felt her presence in Matthew's voice, as he directed the crew in Preston's calloused hands, as he swung a hammer in Cooper's laughter, as he ran to hug me wearing a hard hat 2 sizes too big. She had built something that would outlast both of us. That was real legacy. Looking back at this family story, I see now what Dorothy tried to teach me 40 years ago. You can't hand someone respect, they have to earn it. Don't be like me watching silently while entitlement destroys what you've built. Speak the hard truths early even when it hurts. This wasn't dad revenge. Revenge is poison. This was a lesson wrapped in love, a trap designed not to destroy Preston, but to save him. Dorothy gave him exactly what he demanded, knowing it would collapse under the weight of what he didn't earn. That's the difference between punishment and teaching. The real family story here isn't about a failing business or stolen money. It's about 3 generations learning that legacy isn't something you inherit in a will. It's something you build with scarred hands, early mornings, and showing up when it's hard. Matthew learned it. Preston had to lose everything to learn it. Cooper's learning it now, 1 nail at a time. If you're facing your own dad revenge moment, whether you're the father, the son, or somewhere in between, ask yourself, am I protecting someone from consequences they need to face? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall, then teach them how to stand back up. God gave us free will for a reason. We learn through choices and their consequences. Dorothy understood that better than anyone I've ever known. So here's my advice from one builder to another. Don't give your children what they haven't earned. Don't save them from every failure. And don't mistake dad revenge for justice. Real justice teaches. It doesn't just punish. Build something worth inheriting, then make damn sure they know how to build it themselves. That's the only family story worth telling. Thank you for walking with me to the end of this journey. Please drop a comment, sharing your perspective. What would you do if you found yourself in Warren's position? Watching your family business crumble while teaching a painful lesson, I genuinely want to hear your take on this. If this story resonated with you emotionally, consider subscribing so you won't miss what comes next. A quick note: while inspired by real dynamics in family businesses and generational conflict, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content isn't quite your style, feel free to explore other videos that might suit your preferences better.